Welcome to Peacebuilding Initiatives, where we explore the transformative power of dialogue, cross-cultural understanding, and collective empathy in building more peaceful and connected communities. I'm your host, José Barzola. Thank you for joining us. In today's episode, we're diving into the 2015 horror film Savageland and unpacking how it reflects deeper societal fears, particularly the United States' longstanding anxiety around immigration and national identity. Our special guest today is Kalen Kasprzycki, who was born and raised in Hawaii and is currently studying social work at the University of Hawaiʻi, Mānoa. Kalen brings a thoughtful and critical lens to conversations about justice, identity, and representation. In this conversation, we'll explore how Savageland operates as more than just a horror film. Beneath the surface, it offers actually a powerful commentary on how fear of quote unquote the othering or the other can lead to the dehumanization and demonization of entire communities, particularly immigrants. We will also connect these themes to a broader historical context. The United States has a long grappled with questions of identity and belonging from early European colonizers who at times adopted indigenous identities, such as during the Boston Tea Party, while simultaneously displacing Native peoples, to ongoing tensions around who is seen as quote unquote American. These contradictions reveal deeper insecurity that continues to shape national narratives today. Additionally, we'll examine how the film's critique the US legal system, especially in its portrayal of evidence, justice, and the ways marginalized communities can be wrongfully judged. Too often, these injustices are only recognized long after irreversible harm has been done. So with that all being said, thank you so much, Kalen, for being here. It's truly a pleasure to have you. And I'm really excited to dive deeper into our conversation today.
Thank you for having me.
To get us started, on a more personal connection, Kalen, could you share a bit about your background growing up in Hawaii and what led you to study social work at the University of Hawaiʻi, Manoa?
So I was born in Maui. I moved around a lot in schools until I ended up at Lahaina Luna eventually. After getting my GED, I ended up working at a restaurant for a few years before finally, after the Lahaina fire, deciding to attend college and pursue higher education. My grandfather was actually a social worker, and that's how I really got into the idea of it. I've heard the horror stories, but it also sounds like a profession where what you do actually can matter, which can sometimes feel rare. And I feel like it's important to have problems worth solving, and that's a profession that deals with those problems.
No, thank you. Thank you so much for that that kind of like pathway for folks listening in. If you're interested in exploring ways to solve some of like current issues that you see on a day-to-day basis, sounds like social work might be a really good option for you. What initially drew you to watch Savage Land, and what was your first reaction after seeing it? I doubt it was like, oh, this is about, the US and immigrants.
So I actually started watching Savage Land because I was actually I'm still in therapy, but my therapist said that sometimes something that can help her patients or one of her patients is watching horror movies, and I was looking for something to almost distract my brain, so I started watching horror movies as well. It worked, and after a few months of just always having a horror movie on, I kind of ran out of the basic horror movies and then started looking for these more niche films. I found Savage Land, and after I finished it, I actually thought this might be like probably my favorite horror movie. Probably like I think I said like this is probably one of the best horror movies I've seen in a while because it actually like made me feel unsettled and creeped out. Initial thoughts after watching it was it's on the nose, of course, with its contemporary critiques, but I thought it was good, and I also just thought that what it is tackling and how it's tackling it with the zombies in the film not even really being like the main thing so much as the look at injustice and the legal system and how that affects minorities is poignant, and with the angle being focusing on almost the humanity lost in Salazar's prosecution.
Oh, thank you. A little bit, diving a little deeper into film analysis specifically. So Savageland presents its story through the documentary style narrative, just for folks who are listening who may have not had the opportunity to watch it. How did that format shape the way you interpret the events?
It was interesting because always with found footage films and documentary or mockumentary films, it kind of almost removes a sense of separation because obviously we know it's fiction, but when it's filmed like it's not, it kind of makes it you think, what if? What if this wasn't fiction? And it becomes almost easier to get into that headspace. So when watching that, it almost made it easier for me to really connect with and feel like this is a thing that could happen and to an extent does actually happen in our real world legal system. And it made the fear go from fear of supernatural to fear of injustice that actually does happen to people.
Thank you. Uh, so a little further about the film centers on the fear of immigrants, particularly along the United States-Mexico border. In what ways did you see that fear being constructed or amplified?
Um, I think that what I saw was how the fear was used. It was less, it felt like less the fear of immigrants. Like immigrants were the antagonists, of course, and more like that fear was the antagonist itself. And we see how that fear is used and results when that is used or becomes antagonized by people with biases into leading to like almost a disintegration of justice and morals. And we see how, like, honestly, what I heard, like some of the figures in the movie saying, I've heard something similar from other people just online going on rants. And it was pretty interesting and it was pretty like actually frustrating to an extent.
Now, this movie came out 10 years ago. No, 11 years ago now. Um, and I mean, for folks listening in, you reference like people going on rants online. Um, do you think it's pretty consistent or it's when because when you say people going on rants, for folks who are listening in, they might think like nowadays, which I know with technology, things move so fast that a critique in like an online blog was very different 11 years ago than
Mhm.
what it is today.
I'd say, could you repeat the question actually?
When you're referencing people going on rants, are you talking more about today or when this movie came out, 11 years ago?
I'm talking about today, but when I
Yeah.
watched the movie, I thought it kind of came out like in 2025 or something.
Oh,
Like,
you just
I
watched it
didn't,
recently, is what I'm hearing then.
oh yeah, I only watched it
Okay.
like a few months ago and I didn't know when it
Oh,
came
okay.
out until after. So I was like, oh, I thought it
What
came out
what
this
a
like,
reflection of what's happening right now.
yeah.
Okay. Okay. Got it. Got it.
So I was like, this is like, I've heard this before somewhere else.
Yeah, and that's probably even more like disturbing that it was 11 years ago and it is so really resonating with like life nowadays.
Yeah.
So when we talk about the horror in films, do you think the horror in films comes more from the supernatural elements or from the human behavior itself and why?
I think it's a bit of both. I think that, of course, we have that supernatural aspect, how that's shot with like, we're not fully sure what's going on, but we kind of know something not normal's going on is always creepy. But I think what that turns into with the fear around the human is more impactful. And that's the main point of it is how again, the zombies that would normally be the antagonist are kind of irrelevant in the bigger movie. What's more so discussed and looked at is the how humans almost react to this when they have are confronted with this new unknown factor and how that can become an even scarier like result and response.
Thank you. So, how does the film portray the consequences of labeling a group of people as "quote unquote" the other or dangerous per se?
Well, we see Salazar have not a fair trial. We see evidence thrown out. We see basically different people in positions of authority taking steps to almost confirm that bias and confirm that like fear of other, and how that leads not only to just things like justice and morality being deflated, but also we see how that almost leads to a betrayal of certain principles that people can at times lend lip service to without actually fully integrating.
And hopefully, we're not like ruining the movie for people who are listening in, but
You
some
have to
people are
watch the
still.
movie before you watch this.
Yes, yes. A spoiler, because I just want to reference the fact that like Salazar. So there's a zombie element to this horror film, and even though he had photos, I think like 30 something photos of the zombies who had killed the people, um, he still gets convicted.
He was
Uh,
prosecuted of all the murders, yeah.
yes, yes. Partly maybe the mindset of like zombies, you're just making up the story, but like, now you would think like, oh, wouldn't that be like a case for like, mental health issue as opposed to like, maybe you should go into psych ward as opposed to like
Mhm.
treating you like a normal
Yeah.
courtroom. So, but it goes to the conversation about rights, the layers of injustice that are happening here, because for the most part, people just he becomes the other,
Yeah.
basically.
I think it's interesting you mentioned like courtroom and how he was treated, because another detail in the film was he never took the stand. He wasn't even allowed to speak at his own hearing.
Yeah.
But also, I think it was like what they decided in 15 minutes. That's how long it took the jury to decide he was guilty.
That is wild for any trial
Yeah.
to go that short.
And actually, what stood out for me was I don't know if you like have heard of this story before, but back in I want to say 60s, a young Japanese boy, I think he was like still under 18, he did kill a woman. When he was on trial, he a lot of people were saying like especially in retrospect, he kind of wasn't given a fair trial. He wasn't allowed to, I think, speak to a psychiatrist. He was only spoke with like a counselor, and he was denied the ability to say he plead like insanity. And they even tried him as an adult. And what was important about that though is the jury took only 30 minutes to decide that he was guilty. And at a time in today, it was a lot kind of an uproar, not so much because he was deemed guilty when he did do it, but so much how the process was done, specifically because he was Japanese, how he was not given access to certain things like a psychiatrist to say whether he was mentally insane, and also just wasn't really given any real deliberation beyond just that 30 minutes.
How long ago was this?
This was probably, I want to say, several decades ago in Hawaii.
Okay. Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah.
And I think just it just reminds me of like the not to inundate it, but the many layers of injustice that Hawaii and beyond, where we don't get those stories, whether they're not in the classroom, whether they're not in the books, whether those that write the stories that we are supposed to learn from are skewed. And so it is through these oral conversations that we're able to kind of keep awareness about those injustices going forward.
Mhm.
So thank you.
Yeah, of course.
So deeper themes of identity and history. The US has a long history of struggling with national identity. How do you see Savageland connecting to that broader tension?
I think Savage Land seems to touch on the very prevalent fear of others that we've discussed this whole time, and I think that comes back to just the original colonizers from Europe because a lot of people have written about this, and so I've read about this in my Native American histories class. When they arrived here, there was a sort of disconnect feeling. There was an insecurity felt when they arrived because they didn't know who they were. Even today, Americans don't know how to identify what an American is. And it was described like they can say they're not like European, but they can't say they're Native American because they're not. And it was explained like they don't have that spirit of place like the Native Americans had. So it leads to this insecurity, and when you have the insecurity, there's always that sense of, oh, I need to separate. I need to define myself by what I'm not, and therefore I'm going to deem these others because they're not me, because I don't even know what I am myself.
Thank you. We referenced earlier, when you think of the moments like the Boston Tea Party, where identity was strategically adopted, what parallels do you see with how identity is constructed or contested today?
So in the Boston Tea Party, for those who don't know, the colonists that raided the party, Boston, or the ships, and started throwing off the tea, raided quotations. Yeah, if you actually look at eyewitness reports, there was no like resistance. They just kind of went on peacefully and threw the tea off. They dressed as Native American Mohawks, and what that was explained as is they needed something to distinguish themselves and have an identity, and so they adopted an identity that was tied to the land. And I think in modern day we sort of see that with probably just the use of propaganda images, how people almost make it their whole identity having certain symbols, but they don't actually, there's not much underneath it, so it's almost hollow. And I think it's the same thing. Like, these guys weren't Native American Mohawks. Mohawks were hundreds of miles away, so they would never have been there in the first place. It's just adopting and or bastardizing even an identity just to almost look like you have an identity.
Thank you. Shifting a little to fear, because a lot of this kind of is around the realm of constructing a state of fear, because the othering doesn't work with. It's kind of like fear and othering go hand in hand. How does fear influence who is considered quote unquote American and who is not?
I think it just comes down to wanting to feel safe, and how that turns into um, like a metaphor I think I thought of was if you if you know or think that everyone in your neighborhood's not a murderer, it's easier to sleep at night, even if you don't know. So the othering is almost a way of saying like, and we even see this in the film, saying like, oh, we'd never do that. Americans would never do that. Um, that's them. So that's the problem, not just people all around are like can have propensities to do bad things. It's just they want to almost just so they can feel a little safer, separate it from themselves.
Thank you. We touch a little bit on the injustice, but the justice system and structural issues. The film raises questions about the legal system and how evidence is interpreted. What stood out to you about how justice was portrayed? We talked a little bit about this, but just wondering if there's anything additional you want to add to that.
I think that, or can you rephrase the question?
Yeah, yeah. What stood out to you about how justice was portrayed in the film,
I
specifically
think,
the legal system?
yeah, I think that what stood out was just how we've kind of seen things like this before, like things that very clearly violate the justice system and like stated things that are justice or even just things that are in line with the principles of our country, like, and it's allowed and people are given a pass because it happens to minorities, so it's not really as big of a deal. Like the Zimmerman case, I think if who knows, but if the Zimmerman guy had shot a white kid, I don't think he would have gotten off scot free. And we also see it with, again, the Japanese kid I mentioned, or even just the entire incarceration of Japanese during World War II. These are things that very much violate rights and justice, even just morality, and it's done, and because they can, because it's to minorities. And even now, we have things like, though justice is supposed to be equal for all, if it's very heavily favored towards those with higher status, those with more wealth. And it's kind of a deviation from the stated or proposed shown principles and identity, almost like when we're presenting ourselves as Native Americans, like on the Boston Tea Party, but aren't actually.
No, thank you. And just to reflect a little bit about what you just stated. So I know you've used the word minority a couple times, but that in itself is a criticized word because it perpetuates the concept of inferiority
Mm,
or less than. So I know sometimes folks will use a minoritized, or sometimes I hear a lot of folks saying underrepresented populations, just because once more, if they had been they're underrepresented because if they weren't underrepresented, then they would be not treated as the othering.
yeah, that
So
makes
just kind of
sense.
wanted to throw it out there.
Thank you.
No, no, it's okay. There's so many things embedded in our language and the things that we do on an everyday basis, and that's really what I love about these dialogues. And hopefully, as folks are listening in, just we even use the word American, which um, has been very much taken by the United States to reference people from the United States of America. Although, if you're from, technically, it also does mean anybody that's from North or South America. They can
Mhm.
claim that they're American. But because of the world power that the United States is, they can, oh, we're American. And that's that. Although, interestingly enough, like for people who are outside of the United States, sometimes they'll call people from the United States the longer like United States person, or estadounidense is the Spanish version of that.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, because I mean it'd be like someone, I don't know, from Europe saying I'm European as opposed to saying like I'm French. Most of the times they probably say most people identify as the country, not the continent that they're coming from,
That
right?
makes
Like
sense.
like you
Yeah.
don't meet people from Asia saying like, "Oh, I'm Asian." They're like,
Yeah.
"No, I'm Chinese, I'm Japanese." So,
Yeah.
but I think it speaks further to this mindset of colonization, mindset of being oh so powerful that we can kind of do what we want in the
Yeah.
language and in the terminologies that we utilize. But thank you also so much for bringing up about the internment of uh, Japanese slash Japanese Americans during World War II, just because till this day I find people like, oh wait, what happened? I had no idea. Like, and for folks listening in, we're referencing Executive Order 9066, February 19th, 1942, which basically was um, what it stated was anyone who is deemed a threat to U.S. government could be rounded up and brought to camps or internment camps in this case. But how that was interpreted, especially right after um, December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor attacks, was anyone of Japanese ancestry.
And I think
So,
the number was if you had 136 blood, which means you could
right,
be like a sixth generation born in,
right, right. Have
and
no, not even speak the Japanese language, have no
yeah.
affiliation to family, but
And what's even crazier is no Japanese American had ever, there's like no proof that any of them had ever done sabotage. So they were
Yep.
like, the whole fear around it was never founded, and really the U.S. government had no proof that that was a threat. And it gets even crazier because the list that was used in Hawaii, where a Japanese political power was forming, because there was a large majority of Japanese, that list had been formed prior to Pearl Harbor, and it was just a list of like key figures that they want to, in case political power shifts too much, detain. And they almost, how I see it is they use Pearl Harbor as an excuse to finally use that.
And just to add in to what you just stated, here in Hawaii, well, first for folks listening, Hawaii was occupied at the time. It was not an official state of the United States. Um, and so there was already a premeditated list. And when December 7th happened, the attack on Pearl Harbor, early in the morning, they didn't even wait to Executive Order 9066 in February. That same day, later that day, they were rounding up folks from that list. And there's
Mm-hmm.
a whole list of people that were rounded up across the islands into camps. Some were here, some got shipped out to the continent of the United States. And rarely is that population of folks talked about. I mean, there's stories out there, and there's folks that have brought it to light, but yeah, it's I find that either people don't even know about Executive Order 9066, and and the fact that folks are rounded up on December 7th itself is even more unknown. It's there
It's
was
almost just
actually
like a gap in
yeah,
our history.
yep.
Or it's just like, sorry to shift topics, but
No,
like
it's okay.
The Philippine American War of 18, well, it's officially I think it was like 1888 to 19 or 1900s, and in my textbook it was like a tiny little box at the bottom, and it's just called like the Filipino insurrection or something. When in reality, it's this like huge war between Filipinos or the Philippines who is trying to, they had already won back their independence from the Spanish aristocrats who they had forced into Manila. Then they have now the U.S. coming in trying to enforce and take control. It was like the records are bad, were bad at the time and still are. And it's like kind of hard to track, but it's estimated 2 million to 20 million civilians were killed in the Filipino American War, and it's just
No,
no one
thank you.
knows.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly right. And because it doesn't provide a really good, you know,
Image.
yeah, that's
It
really
doesn't
what it
make
comes
us
down
look
to.
good.
It's not good for patriotism and for I mean, honestly, as I reflect upon my, what is it like? I think it was middle school or high school when you start learning about U.S. history, and there's a big coverage of like World War One, World War Two. When it comes to the Korean War, Vietnam, it was, I think, like not even a paragraph. It's like, oh
Hmm.
yeah, that happened. Uh, and let's return back to World War Two. So it is very much a focus on where there was victories.
We really don't like talking about our worst sides, do we?
No, I mean, I don't know if that's human nature, or I mean, maybe it's just it's what it helps for, whether it's political parties, whether it is patriotism. I think it's once more that is almost like another version of the fear of the unknown, of like how would your people actually react if they knew all the dirty laundry that you're
Mhm.
covering up.
And almost
um
plays into that identity thing again, where trying to curate your identity because you aren't actually sure what it is. Like,
yeah.
if we're insecure, I don't think we want, and like are to an extent still figuring out what we are. We probably don't want to be defined by our worst attributes. So we want
It's
to
yeah, yeah.
control
It's almost like if I were to relate it to like someone raising a child. It's an adult who hasn't figured themselves out,
that. Hmm.
and now they have this responsibility that they are just trying to fake it till they make it, basically, and without doing the research or learning, reading the books to educate yourself on what works, what doesn't work, best practices, that kind of stuff. It's kind of scary
Yeah.
to say the least. Um, so shifting a little back to the justice system we were talking about, in your view, how does bias, whether conscientious or unconscientious, shape outcomes in the real world legal systems?
Oh, I think that's a huge factor. Just a sort of extreme example, but let's say you're either, if you're on a jury case, you're a juror, or if this is decided by a judge, you're a judge. If you have, say, a bias against bald people, you think bald people are violent and inherently less human than if a bald person's on trial for murder. When looking at evidence, just because this is how humans are, you're more likely to probably look for, unless you're really self-aware, which that extent that varies, but you're more likely to look for evidence that like confirms your bias because that's just how humans operate. We look for things that
Mm,
confirm our bias. So if we already assume someone's a certain way, whether we know it or not, we're gonna look for information that um, confirms that, and we're gonna try to not so much focus on information that can disprove that. And in this example with a bald person, I think that would lead to a mistrial. I mean, what's it like? I think the figure was 1 in 25 people on death row are innocent
mm.
and are like
Yeah.
found not guilty, and that's even a conservative estimate. So it's we already have like miss outcomes in our legal system.
No, very true. As a social work student now, how do you see your field intersecting with these kinds of injustices?
I actually think back to this is a story for this. My grandfather, he actually worked on a case with. Do you know who Julius Wilson is?
No, who's that?
So Julius Wilson was a African American deaf individual who was wrongfully convicted of rape and was be then deemed legally insane, and so he was
Mm,
castrated and put in a mental asylum. They only one he didn't do it, but also they only called him insane because he used a sign language that was more popular among African Americans and not known by white people. So he was using sign language to like at his trial say like, no, I didn't do this, but they didn't understand it, so they just called him insane. And then they punished him, sent him away. And my grandfather ended up, with the help of attorneys, journalists, and many others, was able to like discover the injustice and get him free and some level of justice. Not really enough, I'd say. And I think that that's a good example of how social work like coincides and lines up with the legal system, where at the end of the day what I think social work comes down to is being the person who can connect those who are underrepresented or don't have the knowledge or access to justice or resources to get justice. You're someone who can help them get connected to those resources.
thank you. Shifting a little to like media, narrative, society. Now, films often reflect or shape public perception. What responsibility do filmmakers have when telling stories about marginalized communities, would you say?
I think that there's always I'm on of two minds on this. On one hand, you have a responsibility to some extent when you make art and how that is almost going to be reacted to. Like if you make something that's purposely meant to incite violence and make stir up like angry responses, there's a responsibility to that. And so I think there is some level of like controlled destruction, or not controlled destruction, controlling sort of the potential. But I also think that at the end of the day, when depicting different cultures, because every culture you even talk about as America have mix of good and bad qualities. I think it would be a little naive to say like, oh, some cultures are just completely good. It's just inaccurate. in my opinion. I could be wrong, but I think that there's a responsibility to, I guess, accurately with within reason of what you're trying to do with the individual piece of art, depict those people and cultures most honestly, showing both the good and bad that are relevant to your story.
Thank you. Are there other films that come to mind that explore similar themes of fear, identity, or the other? Uh,
For the other, yes, it's kind of a weird one to discuss because it does the opposite of Savageland. The film Poughkeepsie Tapes, it almost removes that fear of the other. Because to briefly summarize, you're watching a found footage film of all these tapes and films recorded by the serial killer, and in between there's interviews. It's like a similar sort of framed like a documentary fiction, and I like it because one, it's heinous and just like I can't recommend it to anyone, and it like truly gave me chills and turned my stomach. But also because it you never figure out like who the serial killer is, so he always exists without being otherized. And I even found myself during the film when I was watching this, of course it's fiction, but thinking like, oh, this could never happen because why? Like I don't know what he is. I don't, like he could be anybody, and really so it removes that sense of other. And I think that's almost how it does that, how it makes it be you think like if this person exists in real life, they could really be anybody. It almost does the opposite of Savage Land, and in doing so, almost adds this, does the same critique.
Thank you. Why do you think horror is such an effective genre for exploring social and political issues?
I think because horror, at its like core, is what the media does is makes you uncomfortable, and it does this to various extents. But I think that when you're going in with that mindset, or you're going in with the idea of like, oh, I want to be uncomfortable, there's more, I guess, freedom and leeway in what you can experience. And at the end of the day, I think discussing contemporary issues is uncomfortable. It can be uncomfortable. And to that extent, there's almost more levity and wiggle room for them to do that because you're in the space of, I'm okay and ready to be uncomfortable.
Thank you. So this podcast is around, we say peace building. So as we reflect, what do you think this film reveals about the role of how fear plays in conflict and division, and how can conversations like this one contribute to greater understanding or empathy across differences?
I think that we look at how fear strips the humanity of people. And I think that, like, we even see that in the film. Those pictures, I love the pictures because it gives almost it gives the actual first person perspective, and it almost puts you in the shoes with Salazar. And those pictures offer a sense of like humanity to him. Like we even that final picture with him at the school. Won't spoil it for anybody, but it's that's like one of those scenes where like really showed the humanity in Salazar, and all those tapes pictures were not allowed in the court. And I think that to me is a perfect metaphor for what fear does. It removes humanity, just like those pictures that not only proved his innocence but also showed that humanity were removed. And once you don't see the other as human, it becomes far easier to demonize, have biases, and really perform things that violate human morality because we don't see them as human anymore.
One thing that just occurred to me when you were talking about the pictures is the difference of 11 years. This movie came out 11 years ago. We weren't talking about AI and deepfakes.
Hmm.
So if this movie came out today, it could be argued like, oh, that was a fake photo that you just created online.
One of them actually does that. Remember the
Oh,
cop,
that's
the
right. That's right.
sheriff?
That's right. But I was kind of surprised. Like, I'm like 15, 11 years ago. I'm like, are we talking about fake photos back then? I mean, not as much as today, I think.
I think
Like,
all that we had was Photoshop, and that was at the end of the day.
right.
Like,
But it kind of felt like you needed to have like very certain skills to use Photoshop. It wasn't like I can just find a website and throw in something and it'll create whatever I
yeah,
wanted to.
yeah, exactly, and that's
Yes.
it's pretty crazy to talk about. And
Yeah.
I think the photographer even tries to say like, "Oh, I these don't look fake to me, in my professional opinion." But AI has gotten so crazy that today, that's a discussion in itself. How AI has almost removed trust in what you're seeing.
Right. Right. Recently, I came across like music videos from two artists I've never collaborated. And then I was like, this sounds really, then I was like, wait, I had to like search it and they're like, they've actually never collaborated. This is all just AI generated. It was really wild.
That's insane.
Yeah. Oh,
I've
so
seen some
from,
crazy. Or go
oh,
ahead.
yeah, no, no, go ahead.
I was gonna say I've seen some like crazy stuff. I'm not on social media, but friends of mine will send me things. It's like this is turning into like the stupid side of AI, but like cats giving each other haircuts. And it's like it
Yeah.
looks real enough.
I feel like that's like the next step of like, because for a while it was like silly cat videos really would be the trend or, it's what gets the clicks. And so now it's like, what else can we have cats do digitally to just get people
And
hooked on
what can we
watching?
have what can we have humans do?
Exactly. Exactly.
Like
Oh my.
I'm now at a point where whenever I see anything that's like not from like a reputable website, I have to ask, is this even real or is this AI
Right.
generated?
Right. Right. Yeah.
Which probably isn't great for like the social trust and like
No, no, no.
consciousness.
I mean, I'll be honest. Like a couple weeks ago, we had some. Well, we've been having a lot of really bad storms, a lot of rain, as you're well aware of. There was one that was posted online by a reputable news source on like, well, it was on Instagram. They posted it, and they posted like a series of photos, and didn't they like, oh, we're getting these photos from our the community, and so we're just sharing about what's happening out there, and they just listed locations. They didn't say what photo went with what location, but one of them listed a specific location, and I was like, "That's not that location." And my first thought after a while was like, "Is this AI generated?" And I realized, oh no, it was a different angle of a photo somewhere else. But yeah, it's just those things where yeah, you end up having to. You just don't believe.
Having
You're
to
like,
like fact check everything even more now.
right,
It's
right, right. So, from a peace building perspective, what steps can individuals or communities take to challenge harmful narratives about immigrants?
I think just being willing to humbly look at like research that may not confirm your bias, but
Mhm.
may be true and accurate. Like look at firsthand accounts, empirical information. I think that oftentimes people will, just have an opinion. I'm even guilty of this sometimes. Have an opinion and look for information that supports that opinion. And that's at the end of the day what I think these like bias comes from. And I think it was UNESCO that said it, or they didn't say it, but they used the quote. It was wars, conflicts, they start in the mind. And so just the path to building peace is, I guess, confronting and challenging and disseminating, or not disseminating, just removing these sort of false narratives and doing that through research. Also, just talking to other people. Like, people will have an opinion on a certain group of people but never have actually talked to any of them before, and it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, no, thank you. So for listeners today, if listeners take away one message from Savageland, what do you hope it is?
um, don't lose humanity and like don't lose humanity. Don't forget compassion. It's easy, I think, when different people will to varying degrees monger fear, and when you're scared, we like to make certain decisions or dehumanize certain people, but remembering that humanity and remembering to, I guess, think about things from the other perspective, um, use empathy can, for the long run, lead to, I think, peace building.
Thank you, thank you. And what gives you hope when thinking about the future of how we approach identity, justice, and belonging?
Well, I think I'm not going to get the quote right, but I think MLK put it that uh, the what was it? The arc of I think the arc of the moral universe always leans towards justice. I think that's what he said. And so
Mm,
to that extent, just I think yeah, things may get bad, things may seem a bit hopeless, but if you keep sort of holding on to truth, keep thinking that tomorrow will get better, eventually we've seen in history things will take a turn, and
yeah.
at the end of the day, was it nothing built on lies can survive the weight of truth. So just as long as there are people who keep having conversations and keep looking for and caring about truth, things will get better. I guess that's the most hopeful I can get
No,
on
no,
it.
no. Thank you, thank you. I just, um, and thank you for we've explored today, as we've explored today, Savage Land, fear, especially the fear of the other, how it can shape not only the stories we tell, but also the systems we build and the people we choose to trust or distrust. Um, so when left unexamined, that fear can lead to division, injustice, and demonization of entire communities. Thank you for putting a spotlight on a horror film, which most people probably wouldn't. I feel like unless you're in constantly like watching horror films. Like there's a group of people who just love to watch horror films. Um, you probably wouldn't be like, oh, this is an amazing critique of this part of society, you
Yeah,
know. So thank you for spotlighting that. I think there's further conversations that can be had about pick a horror film out there, and many times as you stated, like through horror you can do what sometimes just a normal documentary or comedy or like action, like all these other genres cannot do because it is so absurd. But sadly, sometimes the absurdity is such a linear reflection of what's actually happening in real
yeah,
life.
yeah. I think that's why I love horror. It's
it's
like a
it's more
genre
real
where
than
there's more
the other genre.
freedom,
Yes.
and oftentimes that like exploration of how like I mean, in the movie, humans are the real bad guys. Like
Yeah.
that's not even like an original point, but it's still like I think like how they do it in that movie, how other movies tackle their approaches to things. It's novel, and I think you get a lot more of that in horror movies, and horror movies just aren't as popular. I think. So I'm always
I
happy to
think
talk about horror movies.
I think it gets a bad rep. So we always talk about, or I always talk about, part of the process of leading into your discomfort, and many times horror is part of that discomfort. That I mean, there's a few people who I think after a while they're not phased by horror movies. It's all about the lens you approach it by. But if you're used to your typical like rom-coms and action movies, documentaries, horror is going to definitely like push you in a way that you are not used to. And so thank you. Thank you for
Yeah,
this conversation today. At its core,
thank you.
peace building asks us to confront these difficult truths about history, identity, and the ways fear continues to influence our world. But it also reminds us that we have a choice to question dominant narratives or reflect critically and to move toward greater empathy and understanding. So, Kalen, thank you for bringing your insights and perspectives into this conversation. I look forward to you know, ongoing conversations that may develop. And to our listeners, we encourage you to stay curious, stay engaged, and continue these conversations in your own communities. As I always say, if anything here resonates, bring it to your next, dinner, gathering, lunch, whatever it may be, because meaningful change often begins with simply being willing to listen and have those conversations. Thank you all.
Thank you.